famous meme about how on the internet nobody knows you're a dog. Unfortunately, no one knows what else you could be either. And while hiding behind a screen can be fun, the other person could also be much more of a wolf than a pupper. In this super disturbing case from Australia, a girl in Adelaide thought she had found an amazing boyfriend online. She could tell him anything, and he was someone she'd do anything for. But you can already tell that this isn't going to be a happy love story. In fact, after this video, you might just want to double check who's been sliding into your DMs. And that block function has never looked more helpful. This poor teenager could have really used it. So let's check out the story of the schoolgirl who was killed by an online serial pedophile. On the morning of February 19th, 2007, Carly Ryan hugged her mom tightly 4 times. That night, she was going to stay with some friends for a sleepover. She was a pretty popular teenager who was usually known as a fun and outgoing person. Her mom was really pleased that Carly was getting back to her normal life. They'd had a very odd and scary experience at Carly's birthday party just a month before. A guest who had stayed over had done something totally inappropriate. This person's creepy behavior had caused a bit of a rift between Sonia and Carly. Sonia had even taken away her daughter's cell phone, but now things were looking great again, right? Carly even called out, "I love you, Mom," as she ran out the door to meet her mates. The signs that something bad might have happened didn't really hit until the next morning. Carly had stopped answering her cell phone, which she was always checking, so that made her mom even more worried. Then Sonia got a call from someone who found Carly's purse, a very long way from where she was meant to be having the sleepover that night. So Carly's mom called the parent who was hosting the sleepover. To her horror, she learned that Carly never even showed up there. It got even worse when she saw a news report saying that a body had been found by Horseshoe Bay nearby. Like, that's totally nightmarish. Telling herself it had to be a mistake, Carly's mom went to the morgue to make sure it wasn't her missing daughter. And that's when the case got weirder and way creepier. Now, Carly was a pretty good teenager, all things considered, and had a pretty normal childhood. Except, okay, when she hit her teens, at one point she fell in with a bad crowd and went to the hospital with blood alcohol poisoning. But this nasty experience was a total wake-up call, and it made Carly decide to find some other friends. And as this was only 2006, lots of people were only just starting to connect with total strangers all across the internet. Bear in mind, this is like 4 years before anyone had ever even heard of Facebook. The big social media apps included Friendster and MySpace, which both had a lot more users back then. And Carly, who wasn't quite in her mid-teens, soon met a guy on there. He was about 3 years older than her, but he sounded like a total dream. Brandon Kane was into the same music as Carly. He played in a band and just seemed like her type of guy. They'd talk for hours and hours online. And of course, her mom kept an eye on this, especially as Brandon was older than Carly. But the guy they saw on the webcam typing away on his keyboard really looked authentic. For a while, Brandon and Carly were having a really good time, but it was all about to go from You've Got Mail to Wolf Creek. And despite what happened next, I think it's pretty clear that Sonia did absolutely everything she could to protect her daughter. But it was hard to believe that anyone could be so evil and lie about themselves so easily. By January 2007, Carly was really excited about her birthday plans. She was almost in her mid-teens and just wanted to have a fun day with her friends, her mom, and, of course, Brandon Kane. Unfortunately, a few days before the party, Brandon told her he couldn't make it after all. However, it turned out that Brandon's dad, Shane, was in the area for work, so he offered for him to drop by and go to the party instead. While it wasn't exactly what she wanted, Carly was still totally thrilled to meet her bae's dad. Now, Carly's mom had been pretty suspicious. She wasn't about to let just anyone turn up at their house, so she agreed to meet Brandon's dad at a local coffee shop before she would let him into their home. When he arrived at the coffee shop, he was wearing a security guard uniform, showed Sonia his ID, and his car also had a badge for his security company in the back window. Satisfied that he was a genuine person, Sonia let him come to the party. It was only during the party that Sonia began to get a few bad vibes.
Caught him look at her up and down in a really creepy way, and it sent a shudder through my body.
All the same, she let Shane stay the night instead of leaving to find a hotel. But it wasn't until the next morning that she was seriously freaked out.
I walked past Carly's bedroom and he was laying on her bed on top of the covers, and I immediately went, oh God, why is he in there?
All of Carly's friends were in there for the sleepover too. Of course, Sonia kicked that total creep right out of the house. Later, she found out that he'd been very inappropriate with Carly, and the presents he'd given her were lots of money and underwear. Carly had actually called him fat, old, and gross, which is pretty accurate. So Sonia tried to protect Carly and sent him away for good. He did not take to this well and sent her lots of threatening messages, but Carly seemed to be keeping away from him, even if she missed Brandon like crazy. A month later, things seemed to be back to normal.
Carly told me she was going to meet her friends in the city, which she always did. They'd jump on the bus together in the hills and go down to the city and hang out. And at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she left.
But who was the girl they'd found on the beach? When Carly's mom went to identify the poor girl they'd found in the water, she still couldn't believe that it might ever be her daughter. Carly couldn't have ended up in the police morgue, could she?
I walked into a room with a curtain and they said to me, "Are you ready?" And they pulled the curtain back and there was my daughter. Her fists were clenched, her jaw was clenched.
She'd recognized Carly straight away, immediately seeing the same nail polish from the night before when they'd given each other each fun manicures. Now, it was all terrible proof of just who was on that slab in the morgue. I can't imagine how she felt. But who on earth would have hurt someone as sweet and as fun as Carly? The police weren't sure at all, but as they investigated, the leads began to add up pretty fast. First of all, there were witnesses at the Port Elliott beach where she'd been found. Carly had been seen with 2 men, and someone had also noticed a pale blue car with a distinctive sticker in the back. This was enough to trace the car, and they eventually found it parked outside a house in Morrington. This pale blue car had the same sticker in the back window and belonged to a man named Gary Francis Newman. And when they started to search Gary Newman's house, a whole load of disturbing material appeared. He had over 200 online identities, and he was already using one of them to groom another girl about the same age as Carly. And Shane W. and Brandon had never really existed. But how had he done this? Well, his teenage son was pretending to be Brandon. At least physically, it's pretty clear that Gary did most of the chatting to Carly. The son's real name had stayed confidential, although that didn't stop Gary from blaming his own kid for what happened to Carly. But the investigators would quickly prove that all of that was just another complete lie. On the day poor Carly went missing, Gary had lured her out to meet him, pretending to be the love of her life. He'd already been messaging, pretending to be Brandon all the time. I can only imagine how frightened she was when she realized who was waiting in the car for her. And by then, there was no way out. Now, disgusting Gary had held a huge grudge against Carly after her mom had driven him away. He'd told his son that he was going to fix her up, so when they'd tricked Carly into going with them, Gary Newman had tried to violate her. Carly had strongly protested and fought back, but in the end, her injuries were so bad, she couldn't even escape the water rising around her.
She was beaten. She suffered terribly at the hands of a monster with no remorse. Where does that leave me as her mother?
Thankfully, Gary Newman was sentenced to life in prison, but Carly's mom wasn't going to let this happen to any other kids if she could help it.
Unfortunately, these crimes continue to happen, and there's more and more people being arrested for trying to procure children.
To try and put a stop to this sick behavior, Carly's mom started a foundation in Carly's name to help teenagers be aware of online grooming and not to be too trusting of everyone they meet online. They even have fact sheets about how to be safe on social media, and everywhere from Roblox to TikTok. And you can also donate to their cause. Thanks to Sonia's hard work, something else happened. Carly's Law was passed in Australia. This includes a person's misrepresenting their age online as a part of a plan to cause harm to another person under 16 years of age. It basically makes it illegal for adults to pretend to be a different age. This bill was passed in 2017, and by August 2017, it had already caught a 35-year-old man pretending to be a woman in a teenage chat room. None of this will bring back poor Carly, but it does at least begin to help internet users spot the difference between a pupper and a wolf, or something even worse. After all, anyone could be hiding on the other side of the screen. This reminds me a lot of a case I covered where one girl pretended to be 3 separate boys online. She also had a lot of identities and used these to hurt and betray both of her friends. Do you think it's easier to scam people online now, or are we all way more careful about catfishing and avoiding any creeps who are out there?